Hello, good afternoon. Today our guest is Jonathan Nicastro. Hello, Jonathan. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm doing well, Lipton. Nice talking to you again.
Yes. Who is Jonathan Nicastro?
He's a sophomore at Dartmouth, originally from Brooklyn, New York, who's passionate about classical liberal political economy.
All right. And Jonathan, in our email, you noted that it would be your pleasure to discuss the differences between young progressives and young libertarians. What are these
Sure.
differences?
Yeah, I think a good place to start on this would actually be the topic of free speech. I recently wrote an essay for Students for Liberty, their blog, on the different arguments in favor of free speech between progressives, conservatives, and libertarians. And basically, I think this reveals a key difference, not just between, young libertarians or liberals and young progressives and conservatives, but between the political philosophies writ large. So progressives don't make instrumental arguments is in and of itself.
Repeat, Jonathan. You said that
Jonathan,
hello, Jonathan. You said that progressives do not make instrumental arguments. Just repeat that statement
They
again.
do.
Oh, they do.
I think they only make instrumental arguments nowadays, or that's what it seems. So, if people are raising awareness about police misconduct, brutality, violations of people's rights, they're more than happy to support that free speech, as am I, as are most people. But if people leverage or utilize their free speech to explicitly evil ends, to spout racial epithets or do things that are clearly, bad in and of themselves, they'll say, there's no reason to respect that instantiation of free speech because, and this is the part that they say implicitly or parenthetically, free speech is not a good in and of itself. It is only good insofar it achieves our ends. I think conservatives say a similar thing. And nowadays, because I think they're a little reactionary, I think both the left and the right are reactionary, since progressives now claim that, free speech isn't an intrinsic good. Conservatives say it is, but you only need to go back, not even multiple generations, just maybe last generation to when it was conservative Republicans, in the 80s and 90s, trying to get, hard rock and metal music shut down because, the themes were too rude and vulgar and, unchristian for children. And then there's the famous hearing with Twisted Sister before Congress. Whereas classical liberals or libertarians, however you want to refer to us, have always defended free speech, for centuries, right? If not longer. I'm sure proto-liberals and proto-libertarians were defending it for much longer than that. But the reason is we believe it is, if not, used for good in and of itself, right? I don't think any libertarian would claim that somebody using their freedom of speech to say, despicable things about somebody's class or gender or sexual, et cetera, is good. But I think all really serious libertarians and liberals would argue that regardless, it cannot be violated. I think for multiple reasons. One reason is somebody speaking, regardless of what the left or the right wants to say, does not deal actual harm to somebody, right? It is not the same as physically forcing somebody, as physically harming somebody, as killing somebody, as destroying their property. It would be a category mismatch to say that speech and violence are the same thing. And that's what we saw a couple summers ago, right? Speech is violence or silence is violence. No, violence is violence. Property destruction is violence. And you only have a right to use violence in response to violence. Ergo, you do not have a right to use physical coercion and violence to shut somebody up, even if they're saying really evil things. And this was the position of civil libertarians, for time immemorial. The ACLU defended the very evil, bigoted neo-Nazis who were walking in a neighborhood, I think outside of Chicago in Illinois. I'm forgetting the name right now, but it was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood. And they defended these free speech rights of actual Nazis, not what the left wing calls Nazis, but actual like anti-Semitic neo-Nazis, insofar as they have the right to freely move and say what they will through this space, as despicable as it might be. And I think that's one of the big differences between not just young and old, but between all conservatives, progressives, and liberals. Liberals believe in that liberty is an inherent good, whereas conservatives and progressives believe that it is only good insofar as it achieves their ends. And their ends are different than each other's. And that's not really what matters here. What matters is they don't value individual autonomy, freedom, liberty as a good in and of itself, whereas libertarians see it as that, if not a virtue in and of itself, I see it as, I think, a virtue in and of itself. I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it enough. So, don't quote me on that. But,
Okay.
Right, because I start, but they see it as the precondition for all virtue, right? If you forced me to donate to a charity, it couldn't possibly be said that I'm behaving morally. I'm not really behaving. I'm being forced to do something. Whereas if I'm left in liberty and I choose to do good things, those things are truly good because they came from my own volition. Yeah,
Because they came
that's
from
my
where?
spiel on that.
Yes, Jonathan. Thanks a lot. Because they came from where?
From your own volition. They came from you freely choosing to do so.
All right. Excellent response, Jonathan. What an elegant student of philosophy. We all appreciate that you're employing sophisticated philosophical terms. All right. Jonathan, the problem is that conservatives could be misinterpreting the Bible and the Christian theology. So conservatives enjoy citing St. Augustine, Origen, and the church fathers, but if they were reading Christian philosophy properly, they would have recognized that the abrogation of moral conscience is unchristian. If one is not allowed to express his conscience, then he's situated in an immoral space. Religious freedom is also the right to not believe.
You're cutting out for me a little bit.
Okay, so let me just
hear what you just said.
So I
maybe 10 seconds.
All right, then.
You can still hear me. Oh, okay.
I can hear you quite well. So let me just repeat what I was saying earlier. The abrogation of conscience is an immoral problem. Christianity requires us to support Christian believers and also respect those who do not endorse religion. So conservatives are actually hypocrites. The Bible properly understood isn't that conservative. If you take Christian philosophy seriously, it is a liberal philosophy. On one level, the Bible does not permit fornication and adultery, but on the other level, especially the New Testament and Christianity post Jesus Christ and St. Paul, is more liberal. So Christians and sinners can reside within the same secular realm. There's the city of God and the city of man. And I sometimes I find it quite disconcerting that Christians are yet to truly understand that their religion actually permits the separation of church and state.
I must admit that I'm not as acquainted with Christian or Catholic theology as you are. Lipton.
That's okay, not a problem.
But I am familiar with how, broadly speaking, Judeo-Christian values and perhaps theology and texts themselves have informed some classical liberal thinkers. And as something I've come across in my studies of libertarianism are different definitions of liberty. And one of them is Christian liberty, right? You need to be free in order to love God, right?
Exactly.
I think the example from the Bible would be, right, if Jesus Christ had, when he was thrice tempted by Satan, perform those acts in front of all of mankind, like the really extraordinary ones, like jumping off the mountain, and I'm not sure what the other ones were, but if he had done all that stuff, it wouldn't really be a choice to believe in God or Jesus Christ, right? And so the wouldn't really be faith, and it wouldn't be like freely given. It would just be, oh, I guess this is the Son of God, the Christian God is right, so now I'm going to go along with it. So in my very cursory understanding of Christian theology and some biblical stories, I do think that Christianity is lends itself more to liberalism than to conservatism, or even more disconcertingly, integralism, right? There's like a resurgence of people who explicitly want to merge
Yes, I am not in
state and
favor
religion.
of that any
Yes,
at
I would
all.
assume I would assume you're opposed to that,
Yeah,
as am I.
Catholic
But
integralism, yes, I'm not in favor of that movement any at all. It's just like the issue surrounding homosexuality and gay marriage. There is civil law and there is biblical law, divine law
mhm,
and natural law, whatever you want to call it. A Christian pastor cannot be compelled to perform a gay marriage. But if
sure.
some Christian pastors and secular ministers opt to perform gay marriages, I don't see why Christians should demonstrate. They should only demonstrate when an evangelical Christian pastor opts to perform a gay
Is,
marriage.
right. Is being coerced to perform it.
Exactly. So there is not a
Yeah, and there are
Christian.
plenty of gay libertarians.
Yes.
And I'm sure that all of that they would also agree that, you know, an evangelical or anybody, even just say somebody who's a secular bigot, should not be forced to officiate a you know, something that they don't believe in, either for religiously held reasons or just for sheer bigotry. It's, you know, not a valid excuse to coerce somebody, you know. And we also probably wouldn't be friends with that bigot, you know, because we also believe in voluntary association, right? So I
Exactly.
will freely choose to not associate with a person who I think is behaving, you know, antithetically to my values.
Yes. So there is not a Christian case for gay marriage, but one can construct a Christian case against opposing gay marriage. A nuanced issue, maybe too nuanced for some conservatives. But
Perhaps.
and I like to point out sexual issues because Christians and religious people in general tend to fixate on sexual issues. And again,
Mhm.
pornography. Criticize pornography if you must, but I have surveyed the data on pornography and many of the claims uttered by the religious right, these are
Mhm.
untrue. So if you're going to criticize pornography, do it properly. Because of
Sure.
pornography, are men going to become sexually aggressive? The answer is no. There is not clear evidence suggesting that men who watch porn are more likely to rape or become unproductive. An
Right.
argument can be asserted, noting that if you become a porn addict, just like a consumer of
A drug
alcohol,
addict.
yes, or a drug addict,
Mhm.
more than likely you're going to end up unproductive. But the evidence on pornography is quite complicated, and the arguments
Mhm.
being asserted by the religious right are not quite sensible. I get what they're saying about
Right.
the mind body distinction and the body being a temple of God. Therefore, posit religious arguments, but
Mhm.
don't introduce us to illogical proposition saying that the legalization of porn will ruin society. No.
No, I think it's a pertinent discussion to bring up. And I think it's yet another a great distinction between libertarian and conservative values, right? Even if they're claims about what this thing leads to, in this case, pornography, even if it leads to poor individual or societal outcomes. I agree. I think that perhaps the data doesn't suggest what they think it does. But as a liberal, I quite frankly don't care what the data suggests, so long as people are freely doing this, right? If somebody
Yes.
wants to do something that's clearly bad for themselves, like drive off of a bridge, you know, so long as there aren't people under them, or, you know, inject black tar heroin into their veins, you know, those are both really, really bad ideas, both for the person and for society writ large. But so long as somebody isn't forcing the needle into my arm or somebody else's, I frankly don't care. And if they're going to make instrumental arguments, you know, the whole, you know, ends justify the means, you know, even if the means are legitimate, the end is bad. So we need to make it so that people don't have the means to do that. You know, David Hume, his defense of private property isn't that, you know, it's not a natural rights thing. It's not an appeal to God like John Locke does. He regards private property as a convention, not as a right, which is odd for me to be invoking that as a libertarian, but I think it's a lot more convincing than John Locke's argument. And basically it goes that if you want to have civilization and people being able to produce, feel secure in their possessions enough to continue producing, trading, investing, which gives rise to, I'm in DC, so I'm looking out the window right now, which gives rise to civilization, you know, and basically makes life, you know, happy, long, productive, flourishing, rather than nasty, brutish, and short, even if it isn't intrinsically valuable in kind of a natural way, it basically confers intrinsic value to the private property convention, because when respected as a right, and it is the respect for this convention as a rule, right? Hume is a rule utilitarian. It results net in positive outcomes. So say, for example, Christians, and I don't believe this, but let's say they were right that, well, abrogating people's individual right to watch porn will lead to like better relations between men and women, will lead to more nuclear families staying together, which has all of these positive benefits for society and for the individuals themselves. Even if they were right about that, which is a big maybe, establishing the precedent that your individual rights are, instead of being non-derogable, are derogable insofar as they benefit society, is a very dangerous precedent to set. So, if you can't watch porn because it has all these, kind of vague, there are all these vagaries surrounding how it's bad for society. Maybe you shouldn't eat fast food either. Maybe you should be mandated to walk 10 miles a day, or exercise for 2,000 calories a day or 1,000 calories a day. Or, you need to read these certain books because, it instills patriotism and family value. There's no end to that. And actually the end to it is just sheer authoritarianism, which, again, to appeal to their own instrumental arguments, results in a society that is worse off in the end. So that would be my response to those.
Again, another brilliant retort. And I like the example about the dangers of utilitarian arguments or consequentialist arguments. Entertainment. Yeah. Entertainment is a big business. People love consuming the Kardashians, but do we gain value by consuming Kim K and her sisters? No, I don't think so.
Right. Probably not.
Well, for the consumer, there's entertainment value, but there's not much productivity value. But just because the Kardashians are not objectively valuable, should we eliminate their shows? No, not at all.
Right.
So it's the same analogy.
And actually, I agree. It's perfectly analogous, and I like how you objective versus subjective value. First of all, I think most libertarians, most libertarians and broadly like neoclassical economists recognize that value is a subjective measure, right? So there may be some consumers who, subjectively value watching the Kardashians a lot, right? Otherwise they'd be doing something else other than watching them. Maybe it helps them de-stress, yada yada. Ultimately, we don't need to care or know. It's their free choice to watch that.
And the success
and
of
actually the fact. Yeah, please.
Yeah, the success of the Kardashians illustrates the beauty of free markets. In the marketplace,
Yes.
value is subjective. So one does not need to be too educated or overly elegant in order to secure an audience. It's just like YouTube. Many of the successful YouTubers are entertainers, and that's okay.
Right. Yeah, I think that's, that I absolutely agreed. And, we had a little bit of an adventure, a 21st century adventure back into the realm of labor theory of value, objective theory of value, in the whole non-essential, essential dichotomy, right? Well, if you're an essential worker, you get to have these rights. If you're a non-essential worker, your individual rights, your human rights, they're not really rights, they're privileges, and now they've been revoked. That should have disturbed a lot more people than
Exactly.
it disturbed. And it didn't, because people, the average person, I think, unfortunately, is not a libertarian and is some form of a social contract theorist, insofar as they believe that, they don't really have rights. They have things that are, can be given and taken away by government insofar as it benefits the greater good. Now, these people failed to consider the clear epistemological problem of how do we determine the greater good? Metaphysically, is it even possible to sum individual utilities?
Jack, let me respond. Instead of saying common good, please say utility enhancing conservatism. Don't say the common good. If free market policies produce a common good, then that's the common good, not protectionism. Utility enhancing, the common good should be utility enhancing conservatism. If it doesn't enhance utility, it cannot be promoting the common good.
Right. Right. And, whether it was, this began under Trump, right? So he's a conservative. Well, that's complicated, but I'm going to brush over that. And then under Biden, he's a progressive. But these policies, it wasn't a right wing or a left wing thing. Both the right and left wingers are more than willing to jump on the whole non-essential essential distinction. The people who weren't willing to are liberals, are libertarians, right? People who believe that individual rights are basically the highest good in and of themselves, and that the utility that people derive is inherently subjective, can't really be summed. And maybe people express what is necessary to them, or that is highly valuable or highly utilitarian for themselves, through their market interactions. So if I were willing to, in the beginning of the pandemic, right, when people were very scared, let's say March 2020, places like florist shops were shut down, right? Who needs flowers? That's non-essential. Well, maybe I want to propose to a woman, and this woman is the most important thing in my life, and I want to go get her flowers.
Exactly, well-being. It has a well-being effect.
Right, exactly. So I would respond to those people, and they're progressives and conservatives. They're basically all anti-libertarians. And I will quote Ayn Rand, which is kind of controversial even as a libertarian. Yes, I love her. Her birthday's coming up. Of hers. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And this is a wonderful quote of hers. It's and I may be paraphrasing it here, but this is pretty much the quote. Just as a building isn't constructed by the absence of demolition, a life is not lived by the absence of dying. Right. And how I think that applies to the pandemic is everybody was obsessed with not dying, and they were willing to sacrifice living to do so. I'm not willing to sacrifice living. Now, if somebody wants to freely choose to live under their rock ad infinitum until they die, that seems like they might as well just kill themselves because they're already dead in a kind of a higher sense. But, so be it. That's their individual choice. But I'll be damned if I let somebody coerce me into not living, because that's tantamount to dying. So that's my response there. And if you'd like to, if your listeners or you would like to kind of hear a more articulate rendition of this argument, there's a piece on the American Institute for Economic Research's website written by me called Essential and Non-Essential, Never Again. And I encourage you to read that.
Okay, I read that institute all the time. I didn't know that you were a contributor.
Yeah, I interned there for 3 months around this time last year, actually.
Okay, all right, great. I interviewed Phil Magnus and Vincent Geloso. And this morning I interviewed Phil Magnus and Vincent Geloso.
Oh, that's awesome. Phil is actually coming to Dartmouth tomorrow to deliver a presentation against environmentalist technocracy as a response to climate change. And I'm personal friends with him and worked with him at AIR. Yeah, we're good buddies. That's funny.
Okay, all right then. And this morning I had Justin Calais, another upcoming academic. He's doing his PhD at the moment. Now, Jonathan, we're going to briefly talk about the vaccines. COVID is not my problem. COVID will be around for a while, so we must adjust and adapt. I'm not going to lose sleep because of COVID. Remember, most victims of COVID do not require hospitalization, neither will they die. And the average victim is an elderly person. What do we get from the data on vaccines? Germinal van, vaccines don't slow the spread of COVID-19. A study published in a European Journal of Epidemiology, vaccines don't slow the spread of COVID. Lancet, stigmatizing the unvaccinated is unjustified. CDC has a study saying that natural immunity offers greater protection, and there's also a study from Israel making the same point. Vaccines reduce the viral load. So in the event that you're ill, let's say, for example, you're suffering from comorbidities, then you should get the vaccine. But under normal circumstances, most people don't need to get the vaccine. But
Right.
today, there's vaccine virtue signaling. And
Sure.
people like us,
Sure.
we're actual, well, we're not scientists, but we're libertarians. And there was
We're thinkers, hopefully.
there in popular culture, there's a meme that libertarians are autistic. And autism is correlated with rationality. So as rational artists, we follow the real science on the vaccine.
That's right.
So it's ironic that those who are saying follow the science are not following the science, but the science on the vaccine supports us.
Right. It's follow their science, follow their excuse for authoritarian control over your life, ostensibly for altruistic motives. Yeah, I mean, I don't think this is complicated at this point. You know, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. You know, obviously, and well, it's not so obvious anymore, but you know, when a viral pathogen would come around, you know, let's say the flu or the cold, you know, the message, the public health message was to consult your doctor and, you know, encourage vaccines. You know, here's the science, vaccines are safe. The risk of vaccines are, you know, a lot lower than your risk of morbidity and mortality associated with whatever pathogen they're protecting against, usually, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Consult your physician, right? Consult your primary care physician to see if, you know, this is right for you. And for most people, it is. You know, in terms of COVID, it is as well, you know, reducing hospitalization, reducing death. You know, I'm a fan of the vaccine. I'm particularly a fan of the vaccine going to people who actually benefit from it.
Who need it, the elderly and sickly people who need it.
Exactly. Whereas now, you know, it's mandated for me to be thrice vaccinated when, I don't know, maybe those three Pfizer vaccines could have gone to an elderly Indian person, right, who doesn't have access to it.
Exactly my point. Someone in the developing world.
Right. You'd think that these people who implicitly or explicitly, depending on how intellectual they are abiding by John Rawls's difference principle, right? You can only have inequality insofar as it helps the worst off the most, right? You'd think that those people would want to redistribute, even coercively, from me the vaccine to somebody who needs it more. For some reason, that's not their argument. I don't think they have done enough thinking to know what they should be arguing, and it's just a partisan thing at this point. But, you know, ultimately, I mean, I'd still argue that the vaccine should be a personal choice, whether it prevented transmission or not. Now, it just so happens that, at least with Omicron,
it's not as deadly.
You know, well, not only is it not as deadly, but the vaccines demonstrably do not prevent the spread.
According to a study from Denmark, I like to cite the data on this show because I follow the science. So Jessica Rose did a real study exploring the effects of the COVID-19 vaccine, and she's not an anti-vaxxer, and the study was published but retracted due to political correctness, criticizing that the vaccine does not comment on its efficacy. A vaccine having a side effect does not indicate that the vaccine is useless. Doing a surgery might have a side effect.
Of course, and in fact,
it's all about the cost-benefit analysis.
Right. And in fact, being able to have openly and honestly discussions about cost-benefit analyses when they come to vaccines and public health are important and actually legitimate public health officials and you know, authorities on the matter. You know, I use those words kind of jokingly as a libertarian, but you know, experts, scientists on the matter. But you know, when people brush away the myocarditis thing for men in my age group, that makes me want to not listen to anything they have to say, right? So I don't think they realize, the public health authorities, the damage they're doing to their own cause by shutting down these conversations. You know, not everybody may be an epidemiologist, but everybody's body is their body, and they have a right to discuss and mull over and think and consider. And ultimately, even if it's not grounded on great evidence, to choose not to put something into their body, period. Now, if you want to voluntarily associate, right, freely in a private free market way, you know, you're like, hey boss, I'm only going to work for you if your corporation, if your firm, if your business, if your home only allows people to shop and work here who are vaccinated. More power. If a bunch of trying to think of the word of people who are always afraid of diseases. Anyway, there's a specific word for that, but I'm blanking on it. But if a bunch of people who are very scared, and maybe for good reason, maybe for bad reason, it doesn't really matter. If a bunch of people who are scared want to come together and only work, shop, and etc., interact with people who are vaccinated, more power to them. I have no right to stop them. But my personal risk,
they're
hypochondriacs.
yes.
Thank you. That is the word I was looking for. They're welcome to do that, live in their hypochondriac voluntary association in the workplace, at home, whatever. They don't get to force that on the rest of us who aren't hypochondriacs or simply have different risk benefit analyses. Sorry.
But Jonathan,
not sorry. And I believe that before there was a vaccine. I believe that after there's a vaccine, and I think it holds true all the time.
Jonathan, I don't want to sound pretentious or facetious, but people are inconsequential. If I lose an associate due to my inability to accept the COVID vaccine, who cares? There are 7 billion people in the world. So who cares? People are inconsequential. It may sound harsh, but that's my opinion. So what? Should I lose sleep because I'm losing a friend? Sorry, Jonathan, I am not that type of person.
Right. No, I mean, I don't think people should lose sleep over losing associations, right, friends, etc., associates who moralize and make a big deal out of their personal decisions. I'd phrase it a little bit differently because I think every individual is of the utmost consequence to him or herself, right? Right. I'm an egoist, so I do think that, and an existentialist. So like everybody's life, I think, is inherently meaningful, and most importantly, it's of the utmost meaning and importance to them. However, it's not of the utmost import or meaning to me. My life, my pursuit of happiness is, and if you're not comfortable with how I'm pursuing happiness, that's your problem. Yeah. So I'm with you on that.
Well, I'm pragmatic. I'm a pragmatist. People are important to the extent that they are useful. And the moment they disassociate themselves from my space, they're no longer useful to me. It sounds harsh, but I'm quite harsh. I see you're smiling, you're blushing, but yes, it's just a reality. I am not going to lose sleep because people don't want to be my friend. That doesn't make any sense.
Right. No, I agree. I just, libertarians sometimes get this rap for being rather solipsistic. And so I just want to clarify that people removing their association from me is not devastating, and it's clearly not devastating for you as people who believe in the intrinsic kind of value and virtue of our principles. The entire world could align itself against me.
And Jonathan,
I'm not going to change what I believe.
Jonathan, do you know what's also surprising? That most people are unable to analyze ideas at a base level. If one understands a philosophy properly, its analogies are going to be quite simplistic. It's just like advertisements. So you're watching an ad on TV, and the advertisement is listing the side effects of the medication, and the medication is serious, people need it, and the medication is also recommended because it is saving lives. But why do we refuse to cancel these ads? It's a similar story to Jessica Rose and their paper on COVID vaccines. Same analogy. Criticizing a vaccine does not mean that you're against the vaccine. Saying that a medication has multiple side effects is not a platform indicating that people should not take the medication.
Right. I think that's an excellent analogy. Right. Yes. People who are opposed, right? To continue your metaphor, to extend it, because I think it's so good, Lipton. That would be the people who say, Joe Rogan discussing,
Ivermectin. So what? People take Ivermectin and get cured.
Right. I don't know anything about Ivermectin, but to continue your metaphor, people having discussions about vaccines, medical treatments, etc., and the side effects. Those things that are legally mandated you list in advertisements isn't to TV. Viagra, right? When Viagra elicits side effects, right? When the company elicits side effects on the advertisement, they're not trying to promote Viagra hesitancy. They're not Viagra deniers. They have a moral, and in this case, I'm pretty sure it's a legal responsibility to inform their consumers of the potential, even marginal, even exceedingly rare, right? I'm sure on the Viagra ad, it goes, side effects include blah, 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 death, occasionally death, right? Even though that may be 1 in a million people that take it, they are still legally, and I'd say morally, it's incumbent upon them to say that. So with these people, right, Neil Young, who now is off of
who
Spotify,
cares?
and I like Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. Well, I'm actually a fan of that music, so that's a little
you
bit
like
of a bummer
Neil
for
Young?
me.
Yeah, I don't care for him.
I don't like Neil Young. I do like Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Now minus Young, but him saying that, basically, I disagree with your argument, and I think it would be logical, right? We're basically doing a reducto ad absurdum here. Neil, would you say that about Viagra when they list their side effects, that they're Viagra deniers or hesitancy promoters? No, they're not hesitancy promoters. They're consideration and individual autonomy promoters, i.e. liberals. They're liberals. You are a technocratic authoritarian. And I think that we should be confident and loud in making that assertion about people that want to stifle discussion, that want to stifle individual decision-making, because the science says so. No, the science does not say so. And in fact, science is a dialectical process, right? This is what peer-reviewed journals are, in which you try to falsify your hypothesis. And when you are unable to inductively falsify your hypothesis, and other people have rigorously examined your methodology and have replicated your experiment and see the same results, even then there's debate and scrutiny, and that process continues, and it's how we learn and discover things as human beings. So people that want to stifle debate and conversation, right? I said that libertarians support, as opposed to progressives and conservatives, free speech as a good in and of itself, right? As this intrinsic good. But that doesn't mean we deny its instrumental value. In fact, it's of tremendous instrumental value. It's just that we also believe it's intrinsically valuable. But its instrumental value, free speech, open inquiry, free marketplace of ideas, scrutiny, etc., debate, dialectical exchange.
Dialectical discourse. Science is evolutionary. Right. Science is evolutionary. It's never settled.
Correct. It is a process. It's a journey. It's not a destination. And so I think that for actual scientists, right, and by the way, the science says that's, what that statement is? That's unfalsifiable. Maybe these people should be introduced to Karl Popper. Yes. if your assertion is unfalsifiable, that's a religious creed. That's not a scientific hypothesis or thesis.
Yes.
So I think these people need to do a little bit more reading about what science actually is.
Modern intellectuals are enemies of the open society, just like Plato. Karl Popper, yes.
No, I think you can draw a lot of parallels between this type of deductive certainty and philosopher king worship back to Plato. Yeah, I think you're right in making that assertion. Now, I'd like to consider us two fledgling, modern intellectuals who don't share that creed, who don't share that epistemology. But unfortunately, there are a lot that are older and better established than us.
Yes.
That do share that philosophy, and it's number one, it's wrong.
Yeah, older and better established. You're right. So, right. Jonathan, there's a big distinction between being well-read and being bright. There are many intellectuals on the left and on the right,
yes,
who are well-read compared to us. They're well-read, but are they sharp and bright? No, they're not sharp. There's a difference.
Not necessarily. The two do not necessarily come in tandem or
exactly.
In a package.
One can be well-read without being bright and sharp.
Absolutely. No, to be learned is different to be thoughtful. And there's no barrier to entry to thinking. This is why you should always be instantly skeptical of somebody who you're in an argument with who says, well, have you read this? Or alternatively, well, do you have this credential? No, I might not have read this. No, I might not have this credential. But if you've read it and you have the credential, you should be really good at explaining it to me so that I, as a thoughtful, reasoning human being, can understand and have an exchange with you about it, right? When I'm debating, I don't know, Rawlsianism versus egoism or Rawls versus Nozick or something with somebody, I don't say, have you read all of The Wealth of Nations? Have you read Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead? No, I say, here is the distillation of the ideas. There's a whole book about it. Here's the syllogistic argument that it represents in a nutshell.
It's just
I'm
like
thoughtful.
niche. I read why I like niche, and I read one of his books. Let me look for the name. Twilight of the Idols. Yes, Twilight
Mhm.
of the Idols. I read that book. Twilight of the Idols, or How to Philosophize with a Hammer. So niche.
Hmm.
People like to talk about niche. Everyone's an expert on niche. But how many people recognize that he was actually lamenting the decline of Christianity, not celebrating it? How many? Most
Not
of
me. I'm not well read in
yeah,
Nietzsche.
okay,
So,
okay. But he's a
but
misunderstood
uh,
philosopher.
right,
It's
right.
just like Hegel. One does not need to be an expert in Hegelian thought to recognize that his philosophy is highly theological and
Hmm.
somewhat mystical. When you read him, it's like you're reading a verse from the Bible. It's literary, philosophical, and theological. This is not your usual philosopher. He like I'm yet to meet someone with a similar position, but I think that Hegel is the philosophy, what Jesus is the civilization and Christianity.
Hmm. It's a
So
bold claim.
yeah, you can read Hegelian philosophy similarly to Christian philosophy. So what he's saying is this: X and Y variables culminate culminate in the realization of the fullest human potential, whatever. So I draw some parallels between him and Christianity. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't read a philosopher properly, but you should understand him. And too often people read philosophical books without understanding the essence of the philosophy.
Sure. Too often people do all sorts of things without without thinking.
Yeah,
Yes.
but
So
I'm going back to ivermectin. I'm not an expert on ivermectin. I wouldn't use it to treat COVID, but there are examples of people who relied on ivermectin and today they're okay. So again, it's a matter of personal choice.
listen, I know nothing about it, but since I'm a libertarian, I don't need to know anything about it. If somebody wants, again, to go back to my heroin example, if somebody freely wants to put heroin in their bloodstream, that's their right. Now, if somebody, again, I don't know anything about this particular drug you're mentioning, if somebody were to not coerce them, but to defraud them about it and say, this is totally safe and this will do this, and then it doesn't do that or it hurts the person, I think that's tantamount to coercion. And I think that to do so would be wrong. You see what I'm saying?
Yes.
But people choosing and exploring options and analyzing for themselves costs and benefits, again, particularly with people who do have knowledge on it, right? Who are experts, who do, have knowledge that other people don't have. And then that knowledge is able to,
Yes.
kind of be
And
verified and cross-checked. Go for it.
ivermectin can be employed to do more than treat animals. It's a prize-winning drugs. It's a prize-winning drug. You can do more than treat animals. So yes,
Um,
it's a
right. You
recommend.
may,
Yes, ivermectin is a recommended drug. It may not be the best drug to treat COVID, but it's a recommended drug.
I've heard that it's safe. I don't know
Yes.
what its efficacy is for anything. I don't know what its original use case is even for, but I have heard, and again, this is just me hearing, this isn't me saying this authoritatively, that it is safe. So again, I don't know why people are so hawkish
Flustered.
on
Yes.
things
Why
like that.
exactly? I don't know either. Like for me, Jonathan, I'm just moving on. I have to move on. I can't dwell on COVID indefinitely. At some
Yes,
point,
please.
we have to admit COVID will be here for a while, but we have to make money, achieve,
But
and
we have
move
to
on.
live.
Yeah,
We
exactly,
have to
and live
live.
and eat good
Right.
food. Like I still
Yes.
eat out, but then again, usually it's me or literally one or two people, and it's the same people all the time.
Oh,
So
I go to parties.
or
I
you go,
meet new people.
or you go to
I've been doing this
parties.
for a long time. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. I've been going to parties in DC. I've been partying in New York. I've been partying, other places.
Okay.
Um, you
What's the
know,
nature of these parties?
dance parties, music
Okay, so
parties,
real
right?
parties. Okay.
Real parties, with like hundreds of people at them. Yeah. That's what, for me, that's an instantiation of pursuing happiness. And I've contracted COVID once, and once I contracted COVID, once I thought I contracted COVID, I got tested the next day, and when it was clear, because I was super symptomatic, that I'm sure I was spewing, viral loads all over the places, I quarantined in my room for whatever the recommended time was. Now, while I was actually in quarantine, the recommended time switched from 10 to 5 days. Don't know how that works. That's kind of interesting. But it's not like I'm a sadist. It's not like I want to deliberately put other people at risk, right? So when it was obvious and then verified by a test that I was sick with COVID, I quarantined at home, right? We libertarians encourage personal and voluntary responsibility, right? So I was responsible, but behaving the same way then when I had the disease, wittingly, then very, very obviously, to encouraging people to behave like that all the time ad infinitum, so long as there is any viral pool in existence from which to spread, that is pathological. Talk about a pathogen. That ideology is pathological. And it's anti-human. So
for example, in my case, Jonathan, I actually got money, a scholarship to attend a libertarian conference, but I did not go due to COVID. Then I got a grant from an institution, and this institution was hosting a networking event. And again, because of COVID, I did not go. Mm-hmm. And in hindsight, I regret not going because I obviously missed out. Mm-hmm. I was being too careful, but you're right. If you want to live in the COVID era, you have to live. Adjusting does not mean the inability to live.
Right. Totally agree.
Yeah. And last point on vaccine. So in Jamaica, because I live in Jamaica, some foolish people are saying that when unvaccinated people contract COVID, vaccinated people in the hospital ought to receive first preference. And I respond by saying unvaccinated people are financing the health system via taxation. Furthermore, public systems are not free. So either way, people are still required to pay money. So if I am funding the health system and I'm still being required to pay money, even if I am unvaccinated, I ought to be treated because the government is imposing a tax on me to fund the health system. So I don't buy that argument.
I don't buy that argument, but I don't buy it for other reasons, and I'll explain. This is why I'm against mixed economies and positive rights. For people that are listening, I'm putting rights in quotation marks right now, because entitlements are not rights.
Not at all.
In fact, entitlements, particularly public health entitlements, come explicitly at the expense of negative rights. Usually they come at the expense of your negative right to your private property not being stolen.
Which is your income. Your income tax, that's private property.
Right. Income tax is theft, for example. It's particularly theft when it's purely for a transfer payment, right, that you don't benefit from. But let's say systems like the NHS in the United Kingdom, their citizenry has commensurately fewer negative rights, and for inarguable reason. The argument goes, well, we've said that you have a positive right to healthcare. If your actions jeopardize this common pool resource, which is what public healthcare is, for others, then you no longer have the negative right to, I don't know, let's ride a motorcycle without a helmet, smoke cigarettes, or, as we saw during COVID, basically live, work, or do anything, because that could burden our hospitals. And now your negative rights are contingent on the existence of a positive right, a public resource. That seems very odd and unconvincing to me. Did humans not have negative rights before hospitals existed? Right? Were humans' negative rights contingent on hospitals existing in the year 2000 BC? You see what I'm saying? It doesn't make sense. And moreover, it encourages. So philosophically, it's like kind of bankrupt and implausible and kind of silly to me. It's also why people should reject the notion of public goods, publicly funded goods or services they necessarily come at the expense of your negative rights. Frederick Bastiat writes very well on this in The Law. And I don't know, within the mixed economy in which we live, I think the argument becomes harder. You know, if you embrace publicly funded hospitals, I think it becomes a lot harder to justify libertarian positions, which is why I think libertarians need to reject these things. But yeah, that's what I'd say.
You are such an erudite student. Your professors must be proud. I can just look at their faces. They're so elated by your brilliance.
Likewise, Lipton.
Okay, all right. So, Jonathan, we're talking about cancel culture, right-wing cancel culture. So, Spiked Magazine, there's an article published in Spiked Magazine titled, "Cancel Culture is Not the Answer to Anti-Semitism." A German journalist has been hounded from her job for her anti-Israel views. What exactly is this supposed to achieve? The right in America, Jonathan, in America, some right-wingers at least are infuriated at the assumption that the state of Israel is imperfect. They find it objectionable that people criticize Israel. So both of us, we're not going to debate the problems between Israel and Palestine. These problems are irrelevant for the purpose of this debate. But this is the broader issue. If you're going to criticize left-wing cancel culture, you must also criticize right-wing cancel culture. Yeah. Should people be fired for criticizing the state of Israel? I don't think so. Right, that's not anti-Semitic.
It's not necessarily. Yeah, I agree. And I think this is a good point, Lipton. And I appreciate what you're saying. The actual instance is almost entirely irrelevant. What you're recognizing is that this kind of crusading, moralizing, in terms of Jonathan Haidt's moral sentiments, which he talks about in The Righteous Mind, which I'd highly recommend you read and your listeners read.
Yes.
Talks about this moral foundation called the purity or sacredness principle. And so when people say something that goes against what their tribe considers sacred, they want to expel that person from the tribe, right? Libertarians, and I think liberals, in fact, I'll be specific here, liberalism is very much against this purity impulse, right? You know, if you're a left-winger and somebody says something that's critical of one of their protected groups, one of their tribe members, they want that person to lose their job. And what you're recognizing in this example is that, if you attack another class or protected group, right-wingers do the same, right? Conservatives do the same. And I reject it in both cases, right? There are some things, there are some positions which genuinely are, untenable, immoral, really indefensible, even if you're a tolerant liberal person like myself. And I've gotten into discussions with these people, and instead of, and now I'm gonna use an instrumental argument, right? Even if what they're saying is really intrinsically not just bad or questionable, but like evil, right? It's like sheer bigotry towards a group of people. What happens when you cost that person their job, their normal friends, right? Their normal non-bigoted friends and family members. What you do is you force that person into a toxic bubble where the only people that now he's able to do like economic transactions with, talk to, spend time
are
with,
undesirables.
Are these other horrible people. And then you get more of them, then they propagate, right? And then they kind of fester in their evil, illiberal, bigoted ideas. And then sometimes they lash out and do physically violent things. Moreover, and I think perhaps this will appeal to you as a Christian, I happen to be an atheist.
You're an atheist?
Yeah.
Not a problem.
I happen to be an atheist, but I do believe that human beings can change. They can recognize the error of their ways. They can learn, right? Human beings can learn. They can learn concepts, math, like technical concepts. They can also learn moral concepts. So when I'm speaking to somebody who's a collectivist, right, kind of to borrow from libertarian or Randian language, and I think they're saying something that is evil, I don't run around and say, hey, look at this evil collectivist. He believes X, Y, and Z, go hate him, go cost him his job, his friendships, his family. Say, well, I really disagree with you on that. And let's unpack why you believe that. And let me convince you that you're wrong. And, the ability to do that instead of canceling somebody demonstrates two things. Number one, it demonstrates that you're optimistic about human nature. And that you believe people can change and become better, which since we're all, I'm going to say it in atheistic language rather than Christian language, but to you, it would be sinners since we're all sinners.
No, not
To me,
no. I wouldn't necessarily call you a sinner. So I'm a
no,
Christian,
no, no, no,
but
no,
I'm
no,
a
no, I'm saying,
rational Christian.
no, I'm not saying you'd call me that. I'm saying you Christians regard everybody as flawed
Okay.
sinners. Right. And I, as just an observant atheist, know that very few people are morally perfect. In fact, probably nobody is. And so it's a real problem if after a moral trespass, you now no longer deserve to live and socialize with people. So after our first moral trespass, should we just die? Should we just crawl under a rock? No, you learn and become a better person. You repent, to borrow from Christian language. You become better. You help people become better people, better contributing members of society, friends, kind-hearted people. So I think that this, canceling it's really puritanism. This moralizing, puritanical attitude needs to be expelled. It's also the antithesis of liberalism.
Jonathan, I like classifications. So what we're discussing, I'm going to refer to it as the collectivism of moral punishment.
Okay.
I like classifications.
To name is to know.
Yes, but racism. So today it's frequently to lament that America is being plagued by systemic racism. And I've written articles refuting the concept, but there is a kernel of truth to this argument. And let me explain. So, Jonathan, I am bold, as my listeners and you should know by now. And because I am bold, I don't have a problem writing for renegade publications. So one editor likes to pay his writers. I care about money. I enjoy being paid, but I don't love money. Money is a means to an end. So you get money, you buy a house, you build an organization, and you move on. So I want money to finance research. That's my goal. So this writer likes my pieces and he enjoys paying on time. But because of cancel culture, he's unable to use PayPal and other mechanisms. So presently, I am yet to be paid. He told me to download an app and I can't be bothered to download the app. So my point is this: if you care about minorities and their incomes, get rid of cancel culture. Cancel culture is perpetuating systemic racism and the income gap. Because of cancel culture and political correctness, I am losing money because PayPal won't allow this writer to pay me. Why? Because PayPal does not like his views.
It is at least marginally exacerbating that, Lipton. Yes, even very marginally. Fair enough.
Exactly my point. But before we go, Jonathan, I'm sure, well, most of the people who listen to my show are from over 25 to their 30s and 50s. But let's say, for example, that a 16-year-old is listening to my show, and he wants to understand the ropes to success in the libertarian world. We went to AEI, I went to IHS and Cato, and I'm also an EV fellow. Today, you are an intern. You're an intern at a prestigious organization, and you also wrote for AIER. So, give some tips to young people.
Sure. This is going to sound a little Pollyanna, but it's true. You just need to keep an open mind, remain outcome independent, and open to opportunities. Quite frankly, before I applied to the internship at AIER, I didn't know it existed. I followed it because I liked their content on Instagram. And when they had an opening for an internship, I reached out to the pre-existing mentors and I was like, hey, are you familiar with this? They were like, yeah, I happen to know the president. They do this. They're legit. Go for it. So I did. And then from there, really just being, it's not about being an overachiever. It's not about being naturally gifted. It's about pursuing what you're genuinely passionate about, right? AIR, it's a very pro free market, pro individual liberty organization. I'm genuinely passionate about that, I think, as your listeners can tell. And, so I was not only able to learn and grow technically there, but I also made a lot of friends, right? I'm friends with Lipton from AEI's Summer Honors program.
Yeah, we met in a networking event. That's what we met.
Right.
Yes.
On a virtual AEI networking event. And then now all of these things dovetail, and it's basically like the first branch on a tree, which gives rise to, other branches, right? It kind of exponentially increases. So yeah, so Lipton listed off his affiliations, right? I've worked at the American Institute for Economic Research. I'm interning right now at the new Civil Liberties Alliance. I did the American Enterprise Institute Summer Honors Program. I lead their campus organization.
Where are you interning now?
Council,
Where are you interning now?
the new Civil Liberties Alliance.
Okay.
It is they specialize in defending Americans, constitutional rights, right? Constitutionally recognized civil liberties from the administrative state specifically. You can learn more at nclalegal.org.
Yes.
They're a great organization.
And in the next 10 years, you will be running for Senate. And that's why I'm interviewing you. I'm launching your political career.
Oh, hopefully I'll just be a successful lawyer by that time. I'm not brave enough for politics. That's what Obi-Wan says in Star Wars. But to enumerate some of the other organizations that your young listeners can be familiar with them, the Fund for American Studies is subsidizing my courses at GMU and my internship this summer, which will, hopefully be at the Cato Institute, if I'm lucky and deserving enough. Let's see what else. I'm applying to the Koch internship program. I'm affiliated with Students for Liberty and Young Americans for Liberty. And then on campus or locally, at Dartmouth, there's this organization called the Political Economy Project, which I work with very closely. Free the Facts is about raising awareness about the US's totally insolvent fiscal situation. FIRE is a great organization promoting free speech on campus and student rights on campus. There are really a lot of
and also, Jonathan, I should also remind young people, work ethic is important. Improve your writing skills, read, and never be afraid
read.
Never be afraid to send an email. People are responsive.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Academics in general and academics in the liberty space. Yeah, very receptive. Yes, reading is great. The online library of liberty, right? OLL, they have a lot of really great stuff for free. Avail yourself. If your library of, there are a lot of like video essays and video narrations of books on YouTube. That stuff is all great. And one final thing, sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'd encourage your young listeners to be likable. Not to be obsequious, but to be somebody that people like to be around, like to work with, and that just in general people like.
Yeah, do not flatter. You said do not flatter. It's a synonym.
Right. Don't be obsequious. Right. Yeah, don't be a brown noser.
Yes.
But being somebody that others like to work with and is like a good, nice fellow to be around, the importance and benefit you derive from that, both intrinsically because it's good to be a good person, but also instrumentally insofar as it forwards your professional aspirations, cannot be overstated for your younger audience.
All right. So, wow, this was a winner conversation, Jonathan, but unfortunately, I have to wrap up. To be honest, Jonathan, I was planning to speak for like 25 minutes. So far, we have been speaking for like 1 hour and 4 minutes because they're just so brilliant.
Oh, no. It's because you're such an entertaining interlocutor.
All right, Jonathan. Okay, then. So bye. And we'll definitely speak again via email or on the show. Okay, bye.
Absolutely. It was great talking to you.
Yes.
Bye.